here and cue up our presentation. Perfect. So as we get started here, and hopefully, Angela, just give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen here. Thank you. We're going to be chatting all about investing for your child's future, but I wanted to start with a quick sort of poll temperature check. And I'd love if each of you in the chat here could enter the first word that comes to mind when you think about investing for your child's future. So, first word could be anything, anything's fair game. As you think about that, I'm going to get our presentation started here, but go ahead and drop in the chat. So today we're going to go over starting with defining our goals, and we'll talk about all the different goals you might actually consider investing for your kids. We'll talk about the different accounts to consider. We'll go through an actual example about saving for college, what that goal might look like, what accounts we might use, how much we might save. At the end, I'll be sure to share some resources I have for you, as well as leave plenty of time for Q&A. As Angela mentioned, I'm going to share a link to this presentation too. So again, don't feel like you need to furiously scribble notes because you'll get to have a copy of this later. Excellent. Because I am an investment advisor, I have to include this lengthy disclosure. The too long didn't read version of this is I am a financial advisor, but I am not your financial advisor. So double check or ask a professional before taking any action on what I share today. Angela already did a wonderful introduction. Thank you for that. Just a little background here. So that's me, my 2.5-year-old son. He's a little bit bigger than that. He was in that picture. But first and foremost, I'm a mom. That inspired sort of the launch of my financial planning firm, where I focus on helping parents invest not only for their children, but for a wide range of goals. I've been in the industry for over 13 years, a chartered financial analyst. I'm here today because I really have passion about personal finance, love educating and sharing that mission. So thank you again for having me here today. And with that, I want to see, do we have any answers here about sort of the first word that comes to mind when we think about investing for our kids? And let's see if I can figure out chat function. Maybe
Yeah,
Angela,
Kelly,
you can help.
I can read some of it out for you.
Thank
We
you.
have college, saving, college again, 529, and then I wrote confusing, but yeah.
Love it. No, all good answers. I love it. So we'll definitely be talking some good college examples, sort of confusing. I get it. There's a lot there to unpack. So hopefully we won't be feeling that way after this. Um, but yeah, some good words there. Awesome. And just trying to see how I can see the chat, but that's all right. Angela, I trust you'll yell at me if there's questions in there that I should be taking a
Yes,
peek at.
yes, don't worry
Perfect.
about that.
Thank you. All right. So first, to start investing for their future begins with securing your present. So before we even think about investing for our kids, I want to make sure that we are ready. And really, I like to use sort of the oxygen mask analogy. You know, when you're on the airplane, they ask you to put your oxygen mask on before helping others. Same thing applies in investing for your kids. So I put together here sort of 4 different areas that I want you to consider before really diving into investing for your kids. So our little Are You Ready checklist, making sure that you yourself have some kind of emergency fund set up, probably somewhere between 3 to 6 months of cash set aside. Making sure you have any non-mortgage debt paid off, or at least a plan to pay it off. So, for example, if you have high credit card debt, that might have a high interest rate. Focus on paying that off before investing for your kids. Maybe you have a car loan that you're making payments on. As long as you have a plan to pay it off, that's fine. You're on track. You could start investing for your kids. Make sure you have a plan there. Thinking about your own retirement first as well, making sure you're saving enough for your own financial independence. Enough is a loaded word. We won't cover all of that today, but know that's something that you want to make sure that you have on track. No one's going to give you a big loan at retirement to live your best retirement life. So making sure you have that on track before thinking about saving for your kids. And finally, are there any other goals you should be prioritizing first? So, should you be thinking about perhaps you need a larger home for your family, and that's something you should be saving up for? All of these things I want to make sure sort of you have squared away before we start investing for our kids. So, let's go on. Assume sort of we're in a good spot, we're feeling ready. Next step is thinking about actually defining our goals. And I want to take a moment here to walk through a couple different examples because I know when I asked about the words that come to mind, it was 529, college, and those I think are some of those first goals you might think of, but there are a lot of others to consider. So, even making a goal around becoming financially literate. So, being here today, learning about the different types of accounts available to invest for your children, a very reasonable goal to get started. So, maybe if you looked at the slide before and said, I'm not quite ready, even just learning can be a good goal to start. Maybe you're like, check, check, check. I'm ready. I'm done. I'm ready to invest. So paying for a private university for your children is your ultimate goal. That's a reasonable goal too. Maybe you want to pay for a gap year trip for your child, and that's why you want to invest or save for them. Maybe you want to save up for a wedding for them someday. Or maybe you want to pay for half of an in-state university tuition. All of these are good different goals to consider. I think too, even having a conversation if you have a partner or spouse about your goals, your experiences, and using some of these as examples and really informing sort of what these goals are by your own life experiences. So if you had a really wonderful college experience, maybe you're going to prioritize more sort of saving and funding your child's college. If college maybe wasn't quite it for you, you might prioritize some of these other goals. So, a place to get you started and thinking about what the actual goals are. Once we have decided our goals, then it comes down to okay, how are we going to save for these different goals? So, I want to talk about four of the primary accounts that come to mind when we think about investing for our children. So first, this came up in the beginning there, the 529 college savings account. Probably one of the most common ones that you read about. Primarily, it's used to save and invest for educational goals in a tax-advantaged way. We'll talk a lot more about this particular account when we dive into our saving for college example. Next is the UTMA or UGMA account. You might also hear it called the custodial account. This is an account that allows a minor child to own the assets where a custodian is actually in charge of the investments. Usually you see a parent would be the custodian, the child, the minor child, your son or daughter might be the owner on the account. So thinking about a way for a child to actually have an investment account, but until they're a legal age, they can't actually own it. So a parent is that custodian for them. Next, and I think the custodial Roth IRA has gotten really popular, I'd say, on social media recently, thinking about sort of a way you can start saving for your child's retirement, even when they're, not even 18 yet. That would be the custodial Roth IRA. So this is a retirement savings account that allows a child's invested earnings to grow tax-free. Now, the key word in there is earnings. So to contribute to a custodial Roth IRA, your kid needs to actually have earnings from some kind of job. So if you have a teenager who has a summer job, that can be a great account to consider. But if you have a 2.5-year-old like myself, he would need a job or some kind of income before I could actually contribute to his custodial Roth IRA. Finally, I list your taxable brokerage account. So this would be an account that you have at a bank, like let's say Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab. This would be in your own name, or it could be you and your partner or spouse, but you would earmark it as savings for your child. So for example, I might open an account at Fidelity called Kelly's brokerage account. And I might invest in that account knowing that I want to use it to fund my son's gap year or fund his future wedding or some other goal that I'm saving towards. So it's lots of flexibility, but it won't have some of the same tax advantages as these other accounts. So pause there for a moment. Think about those as our four major accounts we're going to consider. And using those four accounts, I want to walk through an example of saving for college and what that might look like, which of these accounts you might consider or not consider for saving for that goal. All right, our fictional family here, we're going to meet the Clooneys, George and Amal. They happen to live in California. They have twin 4-year-olds, Ella and Alexander, and their goal that they talked about together was they want to cover 2 years of in-state tuition for both Ella and Alexander. So they want to save and cover 2 years of school for both of them. They're going to hope for scholarships, or that maybe Ella and Alexander will take out loans to fund the remaining portion of college should they choose to go. So, background on the case there. So, first, now that we know their goal, we want to say, okay, how much do they need to actually save to reach that goal? So, we're going to need to make a couple different assumptions. So, first, any current savings that they already have, we're going to assume here that they have not saved anything yet for college. They've been focusing perhaps on daycare payments or childcare payments or other things up until this point, but they're ready to get started now. We're also going to assume that Ella and Alexander are going to start college at 18. We also need to make some assumptions around the future cost of college. So I laid out a big number there. And yes, I will admit that is a shocking number to see. That if we look out, sort of when Ella and Alexander are 18, the estimated cost of in-state tuition would be $212,661. So if their goal is to cover half of that, that would be that 106,000 number for each of them. We also need to make some assumptions around what the investment returns will be and around how college costs will change over time. So a lot of assumptions we're making here and a lot of different scenarios we'll take a peek at, but I'll show you sort of a simplified calculator to get us to a number that will determine how much we need to save each year for college. So what I've pasted here is from a Vanguard College calculator, and there's a link to this, so you'll have access to this calculator when I share the presentation here, but I'll walk you through what we're looking at. So here I entered sort of the current data for the twins. They're 4 years old, starting at 18. You're able to say sort of what your goal is. So here I said we're looking for a public 4-year school. You can also change that to if you're looking to fund a private school, or perhaps you have a specific school in mind, maybe Stanford or bust. So you enter Stanford here. You can also project that out as well. Then you could enter what you're planning to contribute. So in this case, said 312 monthly. You can also do annual contributions. Again, how much currently saved, what we're expecting in returns, how much we want to cover, and how much we think college might increase per year. Calculator sort of shows you on the right-hand side here how that will all pan out. So I entered the 312 number because that will be the amount that they need to save to reach that goal of covering 50% of the tuition. If you entered a contribution in here that isn't quite enough, then the calculator will tell you how much more you need to save in order to reach that goal. So for the Clooneys, if they're going to fund that college goal, we know that they're going to need to save $312 each month to get there. Again, is based on a couple different assumptions here. We're assuming how the markets will return. We're assuming that college is getting more and more expensive every year. A lot of assumptions. We don't have a crystal ball, so it's also a good idea to play with sort of a range of outcomes here. So now that we know how much they should be saving, where exactly should they be saving it? So what types of accounts should they be using to save for that college goal. First, I want to consider that 529 account. Couple benefits I want to walk through. So first, the tax advantages. So with a 529 account, you can contribute to the account. It's going to grow tax-free, meaning that investments, they'll pay dividends, they'll pay interest. As that's happening, you won't have to pay taxes as that money's growing. And when it comes time for Ella and Alexander, the Clooney's kids, to go to school, they can then sell those investments and withdraw them to pay tuition. For qualified education expenses, those withdrawals will also be tax-free. So from a tax perspective, there's some pretty good things going on here. Another benefit to keep in mind, investments are not owned by the child for the FAFSA. So thinking about if financial student aid is going to be a factor, usually having investments that are not owned by the child is better overall. Also, benefit anyone can contribute. And this is a big one too, even I'd say if you aren't yourself planning to contribute to a 529, this is one of my favorite ways to sort of gently tell friends and family that perhaps you don't need more trucks or fire trucks around your house and you still want a gift for your child for Christmas or birthday. Contributions to a 529 account can be a great way to do that. Um, Particularly for last Christmas, I think my son has about 5 fire trucks that are in his playroom now. So it was great to say, you know, instead of doing that, contribute to his 529 account. I'll say grandparents kind of listen to some of that. But anyone can contribute. Grandparents, friends, neighbors, you name it, anyone can put money in that 529 account. Another benefit is parents stay in control of the 529 account. So we'll talk about this a little bit more when we discuss the UTMA, UGMA, and a drawback there. But as a parent, if you open the 529 account for the benefit of your child, you control those assets. Even if they don't use them for college, after college, you are still going to be in control of what happens to those funds. Also know the beneficiary can be changed, either twin. So let's say Ella goes to college, but Alexander decides college is not for him. Then you could always switch Alexander's 529 over to Ella and use it to pay her tuition. So you can change between siblings, even if there's a particular cousin that you're fond of, they could be changed to the beneficiary. There's some flexibility there. And then finally, up to 35,000, and this was new in 2024, can be rolled to a Roth IRA subject to limitations. So there's a lot of if, then, buts for that to actually happen. But let's say Ella and Alexander get some really nice scholarships. They don't end up using everything that was saved in the 529 plan. Up to 35,000 could be rolled to a Roth in their name. But the account, meaning the 529, has to be open for 15 years before anything's rolled to a Roth. So if you have a child that's younger, start the 529 sooner rather than later if you're planning on taking advantage of that. The money also has to be in the account for 5 years, and your particular state has to allow this as a qualified withdrawal for it to not be taxable at the state level. So a lot of nuances there. I'd say the immediate action would be if you think you might take advantage of that, get an account open sooner rather than later, if you think that might be a direction you're headed. Now, on the other hand, these all sound great, but there are some drawbacks to consider. So limited uses with tax advantages. So a 529 is a college savings account, and in the perfect world, you would save exactly the amount that you need for college and not a penny more. Why not a penny more? Well, because if you save too much and you need to take the money out of the 529, then you have to think about some of the tax consequences. So If you didn't end up using the 529 for college, you take a withdrawal to use it for some other expense, then you're going to pay a tax on the gains in the account. You're going to pay a penalty, a 10% penalty on the gains in the account. And by the way, California also charges a fund 2.5% penalty on those gains as well. So some drawbacks to think about there. You don't want to oversave in a 529. And also in California, there's actually no state tax benefit to using the 529. So some states, like I live in Illinois in Chicago, and we have a nice juicy state tax deduction for contributing to our state's 529 plan, but not all states do. So for California, you don't have that, but if you have a grandparent or a generous aunt, uncle, or cousin who lives in another state, they could open a 529 in their own state for the benefit of your child and contribute. They would get a tax benefit from their state, and your child could use those funds. So keep that in mind for grandparent gifts as well. Last drawback here to chat about, there are limited investment options. So 529s are similar to, say, your 401k, where you have a smaller menu of options to consider. You don't have sort of the full wide range of investments you might with a different type of account. So I went through a lot there, but there's the benefits, drawbacks of a 529. So we're thinking about that as a potential option for Ella and Alexander Clooney. But let's take a look at another type of account that we might consider for them. So next, I want to consider a parent taxable brokerage. And again, this is an account that you, as the parent, would open at a brokerage. Again, think Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab as the big low-cost providers. This will be in your own name, not in your child's name. Your own name, you're just earmarking it as like, I'm going to use these funds for Ella and Alexander's college goal. Benefits of doing it that way is you have ultimate flexibility for those funds to be used for anything. So if they go to college and need the funds for college, great. If they don't go to college and want the funds to buy their first house, great. You can use it for that. If you want to use the funds for something else entirely because an emergency came up in the meantime, you can do it for that. Ultimate flexibility. Another benefit, the investments are not owned by the child for the FAFSA. So again, if we're thinking about federal student aid being part of the picture, having assets not owned by the child will generally be better for that. Said Amal and George Clooney will stay in control. Again, as parents, it would be an account in your own name. You would have full control over that. And the investment options are not restricted. So unlike the 529, where you have that smaller menu, you have the world is your oyster when it comes to investment options. Big drawback is it's not a tax advantaged account. So as the investments hopefully grow, they'll be paying dividends, interest. You'll be paying tax as those dividend and interest are coming in. When it comes time to withdraw the funds to pay for college, you'll sell them and there'll probably be some taxes at that point too. So not the most tax advantageous account, but ultimate flexibility. So what about the other accounts I mentioned? First, I want to talk about that UTMA account or that custodial account. And so usually not my favorite account when it comes to saving for college. The biggest piece is really because of the loss of control. So as you're saving in an UTMA or UGMA account, it's all fine and good until your child turns of legal age. So in California, that's 18. When they turn 18, they could have full control over that account. So let's say you've been really diligent with your college savings. You've saved $100,000 in this UGMA account that you want to use for their college tuition. They could decide at 18 that You know what? They want to throw the most epic 18th birthday party ever and not use those funds for college and instead use them for their birthday. So it is a risk to be aware of when you're saving significant sums in the UTMA UGMA account. Generally, why I don't recommend it when thinking about saving for college. There are some tax advantages to speak of. The first 1,250 is not taxed in gains. The next 1,250 is taxed at the child's tax rate. After that, gains are taxed at the parent's tax rate. So a little bit of tax advantages, but nothing, I'll say, remarkable. Finally, also, when we think about student aid, anything in UTMA, UGMA will actually be assets of the child, which would not be beneficial if we're thinking about getting some aid. I also mentioned the custodial Roth as an account we think of when saving for kids. Again, same loss of control applies here. Yes, it's a retirement account that we're saving for our child. However, that doesn't mean that they have to save it for retirement. Again, they could decide at 18, withdraw those funds, pay taxes, pay a penalty, have a great 18th birthday party. Withdrawals from that custodial Roth will be counted on the FAFSA as income to the child. Again, not beneficial if we're thinking about getting needs-based aid. They need to have earned income to contribute to this account. So again, they're going to need some kind of job. Ella and Alexander are both 4 years old in our example. They're probably not yet employed. Um, and really, we can accomplish a similar goal using the 529 if we really do want to prioritize contributing to their retirement early on, knowing that we could probably roll that 35,000 over. So, given all those different facts, pulling it all together, what would I recommend the Clooney's use when it comes time to saving for college? In this case, I would say they should start saving $312 each month in a 529 plan for Ella and Alexander. I'd suggest they consider opening it at Fidelity because they're in California. They can really use any state's plan. It doesn't matter. So 529s are a little, I'll say, odd in that they're run by different states. So Illinois has a plan, Colorado has a plan, California has a plan. You can use any state's plan. Being in California, there's no state tax benefit to using California's plan. So you can choose any plan. Now, if you're in a different state that did happen to offer a tax benefit, so if you move or have a grandparent, then you might want to reconsider using that state's plan. But being in a state with no state tax benefit, choose anyone's plan. I say Fidelity because it's a very easy platform to use. They also offer some very reasonable, low-cost funds. So here I would consider for the Clooney's using age-based index funds, which nicely change the mix of stocks and bonds as the kids get closer to college date. I would also suggest they monitor the progress annually because as hopefully these accounts grow, I would want to make sure they're not over saving in the 529 plan. So right now I'd prioritize using that tax advantage growth. But as the kids got older and as we started to know whether they might be going to college or doing something else, we might then consider switching to a taxable brokerage account. So hopefully that example sort of helped you understand what a path could look like for saving for that college goal. And I wanted to share before we go into Q&A here a couple resources for you. So one, savingforcollege.com is a really great website that has information on all the different states' 529 plans and has some more good comparisons. There's also a good calculator in there you can use as well. It's a great free resource. If your kids are closer to college age, you're getting close to actually having to figure out how to pay for college. College Aid Pro is a really good online tool that can help you look at some of those FAFSA numbers, understanding sort of what that might look like. It also gives you some good insight into different scholarships and what the sticker price might be versus actual price. So good for those who are a little closer to college age. I also list Nectarine. So the website's hellonectarine.com. This is a website of advice-only advisors, meaning that they don't sell products, don't earn commissions, don't manage assets. The only thing they sell is advice. And for 150 bucks, some are more, you can get an hour with a real human to talk through sort of your plan. So if you read this or listened to this presentation, we're like, that all makes sense, but I want to talk to a human and make sure I have it all right. Nectarine's a good website to consider for that. Full disclosure, I'm also on that website. Advice only network. So if you think back to our initial slide and you were like, yeah, she said I need to be saving enough for retirement, but I have no idea how much I should be saving. Might be a good idea to think about a full financial plan. So Advice Only Network has a good list of advisors to consider for that. And finally, I write the Wealthy Parent newsletter, which is a weekly newsletter I send out to moms with content like we talked about today. So it's free weekly into your inbox. I also have a subscription if you want to see all the historical stuff. Occasionally, I'll send out sort of bonus extra stuff. So there's a paid option as well. This code will give you 10 bucks for the whole year for the newsletter. So if you like what you saw today, want it weekly in your inbox, that could be a good option too. Excellent. All right. So with that, I know I threw a lot at you there in the last half hour or so I want to open it up for some questions here before we wrap up.
Thanks so much, Kelly. That was very interesting. I didn't know about that calculator, so I'm definitely going to be playing around with that.
Yes, good.
Yeah. All right. So for anyone who has questions, feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand. And I see we have our first question from Holly. And Holly is asking, can the 529 be used for earlier educational expenses before college, such as like tuition or school fees, etc.?
Yeah, good question. So for college specifically, it can be used for, you mentioned tuition, room and board, books, all those good things, even computers now for that. For prior, if you're thinking like a private high school, that will depend on your state. You can use it, but for example, in California, it would likely be taxable at the state level if you used your 529 for that private school for anything K through 12. There are certain states where that is considered a qualified withdrawal, meaning you wouldn't have to pay taxes, but California, for example, you would have to if you took those withdrawals before college. But good question.
Thanks, Kelly. All right, we have another question from Elisa, and Elisa's asking, can you talk about the grandparent-owned 529 and FAFSA considerations for that?
Yeah, good question. So I talked about sort of different owners of the 529 plan and what that might entail. And so you as a parent, you could open a 529 for your child, or your grandparents, so your parents, child's grandparents, could also open the 529. From a FAFSA perspective, when we talk about FAFSA, thinking about needs-based financial aid, it's going to be better for a parent or grandparent owned versus you could also technically have a child own 529. So from a student aid perspective, I'd say good thing to have assets not in the child's name, and grandparents and parents both don't count as assets in the child's name. Good questions.
Great, thanks. Any other questions from anyone else? And then for everyone, so this is not for Kelly, but Elise was just wondering if other people, just about what other people are using. So Elisa is using ScholarShare for 529. So for the other moms, if you want to just weigh in on if you're using that or anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say the definite benefit being in California, you can use Scholar Share, Fidelity, Vanguard, and you can use any 529 plan you want. And it doesn't mean that your child has to go to school in that particular state. Does not matter. So keep that piece in mind too.
All right, and we have another question. Can a 529 be used if your child goes to school outside the country?
Ooh, it's a good question. I don't know the answer to. Um, it has to be a qualified education expense. It's a good question. I don't know. I'll do some research and maybe Angela, I'll shoot you a message, but
Okay.
um you stumped me with that one. Good question.
And Kelly, I have a question. So you mentioned that the 529, it can be transferred to another sibling. So it doesn't have to be the same age. So it could be like a younger sibling. Could it also go the other way to an older sibling?
Correct. Yep. It
Okay.
could go between siblings of any age. And within the same generation, you don't have to worry about any tax implications. No, it's also an option, let's say, if your child doesn't go to college or didn't need the funds, thinking way into the future, you could also leave the 529 in there for their children, aka your future grandchildren. Depending how much it grew, you might have to consider some gift tax implications or at least reporting moving between generations. But that is certainly an option. You can also change the beneficiary back to yourself if you were planning on going to back to school of any kind at some point, also an option. Or cousins, other family members, also allowable. So older, younger children, totally fine, nothing to think too hard about there. When you're moving between generations, you might need to at least think about reporting some of that for a tax perspective.
Okay, got it. I didn't know, yeah, I didn't even think that far about future generations, so good to know. All right, so we don't have any more questions in the chat. Oh, actually, right when I was saying that, there's another one. So
Of course.
Sandy is asking, um, okay, so about a follow-up to what you were just saying, Kelly. So a parent and a child are in different generations. So what are the tax implications for that?
Yeah. So parent, child, think about different generations and usually sort of thinking about gift tax rules in any given year, you can give any person anywhere up to 19,000 a year tax-free, nothing to think about. If you're giving someone over that 19,000 amount, then you need to think about reporting that as part of your lifetime gifting amount. So right now, the total amount you can give anyone in your lifetime is almost $14 million. So for most of us, we probably won't hit that amount unless something wildly wonderful happens. So it's not a big deal. You would just have to report it. So let's say, for example, that there was $50,000 that was now in your child's 529 plan. You're going to gift it back to yourself because you're going back to law school in a couple years for fun. Then it would be as if your child is giving a gift to you as a parent. You would just need to report that as a gift between the two of you, but there wouldn't be likely any taxes to pay. The IRS would just need to know about it. Good
If
question.
it is with the same generation, like siblings, like
So,
do they do? I mean, basically, this one person is giving the other sibling, so there's a gift tax as well.
so similar thing where likely you would not owe any taxes, but it's going from one person to another and would need to report that that's happening, but there shouldn't be any tax consequences for doing so.
Mm. I see. So it doesn't really matter whether they are same generation or different generation.
Correct.
Okay.
There could be some, I'll say, funky tax stuff if you're skipping generations, but that would be the spot where I'd bring in an accountant to give the exact advice. But I'd say yes, between one or the other, especially thinking about sort of what we might have saved in a 529. Should be no taxes owed, just make sure you're sort of dotting I's and crossing T's for the tax
Mm.
reporting piece.
What is the maximum amount that we can contribute to 529?
Good question. So a couple of things to consider here. When I said that 19,000 and that's starting in 2025, that's the amount you can give anyone anytime without having to report it from a tax perspective. So that's usually a place to start. You can put more than that into a 529 in any one year. Then you have to think about reporting it as part of your lifetime gift amount. There is also a special provision for 529 accounts where you can give 5 years of gifts at once without, I'll say, eating into your lifetime gifting amount. Again, you would have to report that on your tax return to say you're giving 5 years of gifts at once. So whatever 19 times 5 is, you could give that in 1 year. Report that on your tax return, let that grow tax-free. And that's also per person. So if you have a partner or spouse, they could also do 19,000 to the 529 without having to worry about reporting any type of gifting. So long way of saying you can really give as much as you like up to $14 million technically without having to worry about paying taxes. Now, of course, many 529s also have caps on how much can be in them. But in any given year, usually 19,000 or below is easy, no tax reporting. Above that, you have to think about tax reporting.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Kelly. We got a couple of other follow-up questions. So the first one is, does having a, I think you covered it earlier, so maybe you could just reaffirm. Does having a 529 account affect how much a school will have the families pay for tuition, for example, like the subsidized FAFSA?
So it's likely yes, because it will be assets that when they're in the parents for the child, grandparent, like that's all going to be part of the parents' assets. As long as it's not in the child-owned 529, that's not going to be part of theirs. So will be counted, but for a smaller amount versus if it was held in like an UTMA account or an account in the child's name.
Okay, thanks. And then we'll have, I know it's already 45 past, so for our last question, it's something that you mentioned earlier about the Roth. You said that I think up to 35,000 can be rolled over into the Roth. Is that for the lifetime or annually?
Good question. So it's for the lifetime. So 35,000 for their lifetime, and it's only up to the annual contribution amount each year. So for example, let's say that I had a 529 account. It's been open for 15 years, and the money's been in there for at least 5 years. And my state allows the Roth as a qualified withdrawal. So a lot of ands, which by the way, California does not yet. We expect they will. So operating under that assumption, then this year I could move 7,000 from my 529 to my Roth. Next year, I could move another 7,000 from my 529 to my Roth and repeat that until I get to that 35,000 amount.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I will wrap us up. Kelly, thank you so much for volunteering your time and sharing these very useful financial insights and tips for us. And thank you everybody for asking questions. And I think we've all learned a lot from each other and from Kelly. And Kelly, I see you have your last slide here. Did you want to just give us a quick overview?
Perfect. Yeah. I just thank you again for having me and for all your good questions and letting me share this. I included QR code you can scan here to that has a link to the newsletter, as well as a couple of those different resources and this presentation. And then I'll also go ahead and paste in the chat here. I'll stop sharing, but don't worry, I will paste a link to that thingamahoo, whatever QR code. So you can all have this presentation. Give me